Hello, this is Jason T. Ingram. I go by the artist name of Fake Zappa. I was born and raised in Oregon. I'm publicly closeted gay, which basically means I'm out of the closet. I say that because they like to identify with closeted gays. I consider closeted as something a lot of people identify with, and it's something that is a stigma within the gay community. And so another thing I'm very out about is living with debilitating mental disorders and what that's like trying to follow my dream, trying to compete with high-functioning people, especially socially functioning people, in a world that I came from, which is what I call West Coast urban educated progressives. I should have a better, maybe an acrostic for that or something like that, because I talk about my culture a lot. I'm a product of that culture. I'm also an outcast of that culture. And it's a culture that the media seems to, especially mainstream media, as being like, this is Hollywood, this is the public version of what we think America is, and we think Western culture is this way. It's just that it happens to be the culture of mainstream media, of institutions like education and science and healthcare, especially mental health. If you're in mental health, you have to talk and act and behave in a certain way and make sure you don't offend people. And it seems like we put this emphasis on, well, we can't offend these people, but it's okay to be dishonest. And it's okay to be vague as long as you don't speak the truth. And then there's people that use the truth to hurt people. And so I see these extremes going on. And what's sad is, I mean, the fact that I identify with conservatives because I was introduced to that culture in my early 20s. And I found that they were able to handle my lack of social functioning because they were very blatantly honest, and they were all kind of a little bit nutty, especially country folk. And I identify with that culture more than my own. It's just that trying to produce and promote my career and myself as a product, which is what an artist really has to do, means that I'm going to have to function in this culture that doesn't accept me, that I just don't have the cred for. So I'm in process of, just today I did a couple more interviews for people to do some public relations and some promotion stuff. I'm finally kind of, I mean, it seems like every day is a fight for me, especially the last week or so, because I wake up in the morning and I just feel this dread, this hopelessness, this heaviness of a depression. It's a different feeling of depression because depression can take many different forms. Sometimes it's more of a debilitating kind of a fatigue. Sometimes it's more of just losing pleasure in a lot of things. But this is different. It doesn't necessarily feel like a chemical thing. It just feels like more like a manifestation of fear. Last week was depressing. After 3 sessions with this doctor of psychology, I realized that this guy was using a lot of, and this might sound extreme, but it felt like a lot of cult leader tactics and stuff, and wanted a lot of power and control and influence over myself in small things and also big things, and wasn't an active listener, but was very preachy. And I tried to speak up, and I did. I wrote some emails and things, and I might use him as an example of a project too that I do whenever I feel like I'm in. I wouldn't consider this an abusive situation in dealing with mental health providers. I've definitely had worse. I've had one a couple years ago that was using abusive psychological tactics in order to try to overpower me, as if that's going to... Now, for some people that are weak-minded and that might need to be, and I hate to use this term because I've been a part of cultic abuse, especially within conversion therapy, where they try to get somebody to break, and that is the wrong thing to do. Of course, unless you're dealing with some type of, serial rapist who's an egotist and who's a sociopath or a psychopath, and you have to break this hardened shell of an ego where they put up walls, and you have to break down that if you're going to try to get through to somebody. But the thing is that I don't really have the same kind of walls because I never really had the privilege, because like suffering the kind of abuse I did as a very small child, introduced to this world and just violated mentally, physically, emotionally, and then there was a lot of spiritual stuff too, especially throughout my 20s, that just made me very vulnerable. So if you have this guy and he's lifting up his hands, I surrender all, well, there's going to be somebody standing there saying, oh, there's a person that's surrendered. Whether they're surrendered to God or some kind of higher power, I can slip in and I can gain power from this person because they're vulnerable. And it was amazing how many people there were, especially because I was in a demographic. I was a single young man with a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of money, but I sure gave a lot of money to these organizations. And I was given this hope, and that hope was very good for my mental health in some ways. But after a while, it was very counterproductive. And so I was also recognizing spiritual abuse that came from the kind of more the Eastern thought as well, which was in some ways similar, the fact that we had folks addicted to power and control. And instead of being resourceful like organizations should be, they were draining my resources. And that was a pattern. It was sort of this, I've had a lot of codependency when it comes to relationships, but I also have a codependency when it comes to relationships with organizations, serving organizations. Here's a side note. The last video I did had some audio problems, so I'm sorry if there's a hum there. Here I am, this expert producer, and it's frustrating when I buy new equipment, and even the new equipment doesn't work. And so I have this $2,400 computer that I bought, and it can't even run the software without crashing all the time and having issues. And so there's just a lot of things that I wake up in the morning, and what happens is depression will just pick and choose the things that I think about. And it's like this filter. So I wake up in the morning and I have this filter on that filters out everything positive, everything hopeful, and then all the things that can come through to my attention are the things that I feel like are a mess, that are impossible, that I'm working so hard on and getting either no or little results with. And then I spend a lot of time during the day trying to fight that. Now, when it comes to spiritual stuff, though, I do appreciate the good things that I get from that. And it's hard because when I'm in an abusive situation where there are people that are identifying with something spiritual and they're teaching me and they are using my resources at the same time, it's hard to practice those things because it can be triggering. So one of the things I'm trying to do, like with this provider last week, was take the good things that he said, and really there was only one good thing that he said that I remember, and it could have been maybe the only thing that he ever tries to work with on all of his clients, which is kind of the idea that I got. But one thing I appreciate with the Eastern religion folks was the practice of energy work, qigong. Qi means the life force energy, or the Star Wars force, or in Western religion it would be considered like forms of the Holy Spirit or something like that. And so seeing that as something tangible and being able to, for lack of a better term, manipulate that energy or have it flow, deal with any blockages that might be blocking the energy, and then Also maintaining the flow of energy from other people. Are they draining my energy? Do they have thoughts and intentions and words that are draining things out of me? Are they basically hooking up cords into me, saying that Jason is a source of power because he has these resources, even though they might not be very big, but still I'm going to plug into that and gain power over his life. So I have to find ways that I can do, for instance, like movement meditation is very helpful for me. And sometimes I do free form and sometimes I watch videos. My favorite guru, his name is Lee Holden. Lee, thank you. I haven't bought a lot of your videos, but there's a lot of stuff online, and it's great because he's mindful of the energy, he's very positive, and that's been helpful. And so this provider that I saw last week, his big thing was about, dealing with fear. I was asking him about managing it, and then he'd interrupt me and he'd say, well, no, it's not managing it. And then he would tell me I have to manage this. So it was kind of like this conflict of trying to listen to this guy preach on and on and on. And then I would start to dissociate because I grew up with people that were mental health providers, and instead of disciplining their kids, they lecture their kids. And I see that as a trend in raising kids in especially in the Pacific Northwest and this urban progressive culture. I saw a guy at the grocery store, and he's lecturing his little kid about his behavior. And I tell you, this kid was like 2 or 3 years old. That's terrifying for a little kid to hear all these big words you don't understand. You got this person looking down at you, and it's paralyzing. It's confusing. They don't know what they're saying. And so things like that trigger me, and I couldn't even get to the point of saying this triggers me. I just told him, I said, I don't understand what you're saying. Or sometimes I would just sit there and stare at him, and I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And then he would ask me these questions, and I thought that he was trying to do this thing as if, we were in some kind of movie where he's this coach with this weak kid that he's trying to get strong, and there was a camera behind him, and I was supposed to have some kind of breakthrough. I mean, it was really an ego trip, and I just didn't buy it. I just didn't want to be the subject of something that he was going to use in order to make him feel more important than he really was. And I don't want to be that kind of person when it comes to getting help. I want to be there because I have a particular set of needs and goals that I need to get done, and it needs to be individualized. And I didn't feel that that was happening. So I have to filter all that out and say, well, what was the good thing that he said? Well, the first session, he gives me this spiel about bunny rabbits and how we have the same kind of nervous system that runs away from threats, and I have to add in there perceived threats, which is a big reality in my life as somebody who's dealt with debilitating anxiety and panic attacks, and real threats as well. And I have some real threats when it comes to trusting people in business, because I have had 3 companies that I have wanted to take some serious action against, and I'm working on one of them right now, and there was another one that I fought and I decided to back out. It was just getting too hostile and too risky, and it was draining my energy, and it was sad. It's sad to see people who lie and cheat and steal, especially those that are vulnerable, and get away with it. And I also feel like I'm in this sort of hamster wheel thing when it comes to my business and my life, and trying to kind of move out of this place and move on to where I feel like I need to be. And there's so much holding me back to where it's like every day I'm trying this and trying that, and I've got this big to-do list that just never seems to end, and I'm still stuck in this place. And so that's a really hard thing. It's just this reminder every day when I wake up, I'm still here, and I don't feel like I should be here. I feel like I should be somewhere else. And sometimes restlessness is not a good thing, but sometimes restlessness is a good thing, because if you're living a life to where you feel like there's a vocation or a calling that is different than where you're living, that restlessness could just be something telling you that you need to make some big steps and some big changes in your life, because you're not going to be happy where you're at. And here it is. This is, my third or fourth year in really pursuing this. And I feel like I'm late, although, there could be some good cosmic timing for everything going on, and I don't want to jump ahead of things. And at the same time, I do feel like there's a lot holding me back, and fear is a huge thing. And so one of the things I was afraid of is that in order to feel like I can contribute based on what I had to contribute as far as my activism, my life, my story, and of course the creative stuff that I do, is that I'm going to have to, I can't do it alone, that's for sure. I've spent hundreds of dollars on marketing. I'm just not very good at it, and it's done nothing but maybe $10 in record sales. And so hiring some people and trusting them and paying them and having the potential of what I call institutional support. So whether it's an educational institution or whether it's some type of production company that is taking me to the next level when it comes to being a public figure, I'm going to have to trust these people, and I'm going to have to find people that I trust. And a lot of times it has to do with getting the right attorney. And it's becoming more and more apparent. Either the world is changing and getting more selfish, and I see the addiction to power everywhere, especially when it comes to businesses that are hard to regulate. And some insurance contractors, they don't have a lot of regulation. They get a blank check, so to speak, and they have a lot of freedom to do a lot of very unethical things. It's very similar to industries like those that sell used cars, or especially used recreational vehicles. There's a lot of gray areas that they can get away with a lot of stuff. And when it comes to fighting them, it's very difficult. And it also attracts people that are addicted to power, that are able to, and this might sound like a nice way to put it, but there are people there that can suspend their conscience. They can take their compassion and their empathy that we all have. And this is I found this more in men as well, because we don't have the privilege of having a natural motherly instinct. And so but I do see this with women and men, but I've been battling mostly men who just seem like they can put away their conscience, because there's times in your life when you're in a conflict with somebody, and either you say this or you want to say this, but how do you sleep at night? When you see somebody doing something so selfish and so disgustingly horrible to a person who's vulnerable, who doesn't have a voice, and they get away with it. Well, it's been happening so much in my life to where I'm starting to get this chip on my shoulder, and it scares me, because I'm in a place where, I have to trust people in order to get to that next step in my life when it comes to my living situation, my business, and other stuff like that. And it's a big mess. And it's a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of money, and it's hard when I face every day, especially when it comes to Sunday night. It's not so bad that it was like a month or two ago. I would just be up and, I couldn't sleep. I would be taking, melatonin and different things to try to sleep throughout the night. And I'd be up again and just restless and saying, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? And, where am I going to find the help? Where am I going to find the resources? And just having those thoughts constantly in my head. And the energy work helps, but I was so disillusioned with conventional mental health care that I decided to quit seeing the psychiatrist for the last month or so and get off of those medications because, one, I didn't feel like I was being heard. And I've seen a lot of psychiatrists over the years, and I can tell when they're listening and when they're not. And the other thing, the side effects were getting horrible. They were unbearable. And as far as the kinds of suffering that I've had lately, seeking alternative treatment, being off of conventional medications, it's been hard. And there's also the fact that there are some things I can feel that I didn't feel before, emotionally, even physically. I was numb when I was on these medications, and that's helped me heal. But it's hard to heal when I'm trying to get somewhere in my life and really be motivated to do a lot of work. And so that's difficult. And then another thing is that I'm starting with a new therapist this afternoon. I'm just not very hopeful about how that might work out. And so I have this attitude right now that's sort of like, okay, shrink me, go ahead, I dare you, do your work, and I'm just going to sit there and, not trust you because you're all a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists that are out there for your best interests. And I feel that way, and it's hard to get help that way. So I have this struggle of like, how do I trust these people that I don't feel like they're looking out for my best interests? And I haven't even met this therapist yet, but the fact that I had almost 20 pages of paperwork and there was just very little, there was only one page that actually had any mention of what I'm suffering with, and it was just one of those questionnaires that, you get before and after a session, when you're in like public health or something like that. It was just a form. There was nothing I can write down and say, well, there was a place too on another page, but it was more for physical problems and stuff. But there'd be a page about payment. And then there would be the same thing written out again that I would have to sign. It was like they were repeating themselves to make sure that if the insurance company doesn't pay, and if I don't pay, they could go to a collection agency. They wanted my social security number, which I didn't give. I didn't give to the last person that wanted my social security number, making me sign paperwork that says that if I'm ever going to sue them, that I'm going to pay for, like this last guy, he wanted time and a half. If he had to go to the county and get some paperwork and stand in line, and he said anybody's in that business is crazy if they don't protect themselves that way. And it's all about protecting the provider. Protect the provider against people that sue them. Well, here's the thing. These are powerful career people who have money and they get heard and all this stuff. And it's all about protecting their interests. And there's nothing in there except for maybe like this HIPAA regulation thing that makes me feel like I'm protected at all. And the thing is that if they want to, if they feel like they're threatened, or if a client even hints at doing some kind of harm, then I have to sign something that says all those HIPAA regulations and all that privacy stuff is thrown out the window, because whenever they feel scared or something, then, they can call the county. I had that happen because I'd gotten an infection last year, and they told me, well, we have to report you to the county because you're considered some kind of hazard or something like that. And it was just like, wow. And it was like at the bank, I had this cashier's check I was getting, and then there was a manager at the bank teller, with this stupid trainee like they always have. And this manager was training this teller on how to do a risk assessment, and here I'm standing right there with my partner, and I'm thinking like, okay, I'm having to wait for them to talk about me, about what kind of risk it is for them to take out money that's been sitting in my account for weeks and months, and in order to see if they're going to give me a cashier's check for it. I mean, they waived the fee, but the fact that I not only had to wait for them, but them talking about how much of a risk is this person standing right in front of us, it makes me want to get a haircut. But what scares me about trying to function in a world with powerful, influential, educated people and feeling like if there was a conflict, they would be the ones that would be listened to based on my history. And then if there's a conflict, I'm not the one that would be listened to because I'm just this crazy ranting guy. And if I have a track record of not being heard and not being considered, then it's not worth their energy to try to hear me and consider my experience, or if I'm in an unsafe situation. And so it just gives me this feeling that I have on a daily basis of just not feeling safe. And that is the big message that I have when it comes to dealing with men and mental health, because it's not just women that need to feel safe and nurtured and heard. And I see people making an emphasis with that, and I'm glad, because I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I don't know what it's like to feel that vulnerable. But the thing is that there's sort of this idea that men don't need that kind of safety, that kind of environment where they feel like they're going to feel like their feelings matter. And what happens when you put a man in an unfair environment like that, or in several environments, whether it be their work or their education or their family or their friends or their church or whatever it is, that they deserve a certain level of care, they deserve to be heard because of their suffering or because of what they have to contribute, and they're ignored over and over again. And this culture that I'm in is so passive-aggressive, which is a whole different kind of trauma to live with. After a while, there comes a time, and I hate to use this term, that someone's going to snap. And the reason why I do my art, the reason why I do my activism is because whether it's a 15-year-old man, a 25-year-old man, or a 75-year-old man, somewhere down the line, he's going to snap. He's going to say that I cannot live this way any longer, being treated this way on a daily basis, and something has to happen, something has to be resolved. And if we do not give this man an environment where he feels safe to resolve this stuff, where he feels like he can be heard and considered, and that the situation can be dealt with without being ignored and without people trying to protect themselves from a perceived threat, what they think this guy could do, then typically what happens, especially in like rural culture and even urban culture, where we're bombarded in the media with images of power having to do with weapons, firearms especially. And I don't think this is an issue that has to do with firearms. It has to do with if we look back behind the veil and we find out these men who are committing violent crime, you will see men that need to feel safe and nurtured and heard and considered, and conflict needs to be resolved.